Hey everyone, it's Lelli here at Come From Away on Broadway, and I'm happily here to tell you about my Sabian setup. But first I wanted to talk about how Broadway has evolved over the past 20 years that I've been doing it. Initially, the orchestra was always in the orchestra pit, all open air to the audience, and we were required to learn how to play very, very softly with a lot of dynamics because there was right next to us was a string player. You know, there weren't microphones and there weren't sound baffling material and all of that kind of stuff. So we had to really develop our soft chops more than, like loud rock and roll kind of stuff. So over the years, as sound has evolved on Broadway and they want to close mic everything and they took a lot of the bands out of the Broadway pits, they've started to build booths, especially for the drummers. And here we're in basically what is an isolation booth like you'd find in a recording studio. It's all sound controlled, and padded, and I've got a nice big window so I can see the other musicians and the conductor, and that's right out there on stage. So now we don't necessarily need to have those ultra soft dynamic chops anymore, and we can play more as if we were playing a recording session. And so I just wanted to tell you a few things that you are required to be a Broadway drummer percussionist that aren't necessarily required when you're playing other gigs. The first and foremost thing is that you should read music. You've got to be able to read this kind of music really, really well. There's a lot of sight reading involved on Broadway. The second thing is you need to be able to follow a conductor. Somebody who's going to be standing up there on the podium, maybe they have a baton, or maybe they're just a keyboard player and they're going to be nodding their head and giving you cues with their hands. You have to be able to follow the conductor. And then the third most important thing is you have to be a very, very well-rounded player. You have to be well-versed in every single style imaginable, like from hard rock stuff to jazz, to playing a polka, to playing a train beat, to basically a samba. I mean, anything you can think of. Hip hop. Broadway is this juxtaposition of all sorts of genres right now. So you need to have a very, very well-rounded musical background in all the styles. If you're thinking about being a drummer on Broadway, you might start out as subbing for the regular drummer. And the important thing to know when you're a sub on Broadway is that you aren't really being asked to bring in any of your own personality or your own style. And a lot of drummers might come in and say, I'm going to really put my own spin on this and show them all the chops I got. They don't want that. They want you to come in, play what the part is that the original drummer has created, and as much of a chameleon as you can be to replicate exactly what that original drummer was doing. Then you'll be a great sub on Broadway. And then when you're asked to be an original drummer on the production, you're usually asked because someone has heard you subbing somewhere and they know that you're a great player and that you have a good personality and you're going to fit in. And that call may come from the composer, it may come from a music director, it might come from a contractor, it might come from an orchestrator, it might come from a choreographer who you've worked with, and the dancers love playing the beats that you come up with. So you'll then have an opportunity to bring your own voice to creating a part, and all your experience and all your background when you're creating an original part for an original show. So when I was creating the book for Come From Away, I was brought into the mix by the music supervisor and the orchestrator, and they brought me into this show because they knew I had a background in all these different styles of music. And we sat first and just talked about different styles that were going to be incorporated into the show. They knew there was a bluegrass element, they knew there was a Celtic element, they knew there was a pop element, that there was a folk element, that there was a country music element, and they wanted to figure out a way to blend all these things together. And luckily for me, I've played all those things. I've played, in a country band, or I've played bluegrass gigs, or I've played, with the pop rock artists. So I could bring all my past experiences to kind of inform these brand new parts that we were creating together. And I wanted to show you my Sabian setup for the show here. I've got a little bit of everything, and I picked out every single cymbal very specifically for a certain reason in this show. And this is one of the newest ones, the FRX line that I just love. And it's wonderful for suspended cymbal rolls. It's super light, and the crash builds up really quick and then it's gone. So I love using this underneath vocalists because it never gets in the way of the vocals. Then I've got several ozone, the HHX Evolution ozones. I've got a 16, an 18, and a 20. And I have those specific pitches because there's a lot of ethereal, mysterious scenes in the show. And I like to use those sounds underneath those to kind of add to the complexity and the emotional intensity of those scenes. So I love the ozones for that. It's very scary and creepy sounding. Then I have just one of these, HHX Extreme Crash. That I also picked because it's so thin and sensitive, and it really gets a very, very quick crash, and it's got a little bit of dirt into it, a little bit of grit, so there's a little extra bite that I love of those. And then one of my old favorites, the HHX Evolution Splash. These are beautiful and thin, and it's actually a super, super old school sounding splash, so I almost always have something like that. I've got the 15 artisan hats that are warm and beautiful. Again, a lot of these are picked so they don't get in the way of the vocals. Then I've got, continuing with artisan crashes, a 16 and a 17-inch. And then I'll finish up with a custom ride that I had. It's a HHX. It was called a crossover ride, but it's kind of a prototype that they made. So it's got both kinds of hammering in it there. And I also want to show you something, the last couple things I have that I just love. This is a 4-inch hand-hammered triangle. It's just beautiful. It just sings, but it's not a sharp tone, but it's very, very smooth and mellow. And then a high finger cymbal and a low finger cymbal, which you don't see a lot of guys using those, but I love those tones as well. They're really great for accenting certain things in the show.